Hello, I'm Linda, and this is No Frills ASMR. I just finished this book by Demi Moore called Inside Out. It's her autobiography. And I just wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about it because obviously it's on my mind. I have, of course, known her since, way back, being in movies. I don't know if I ever really saw St. Elmo's Fire. It just was, I don't know, I never saw it, I don't think. Maybe I did, I don't remember. But certainly I remember her in A Few Good Men, which is a very good movie. And G.I. Jane, also an excellent movie. Ghost. There's another one I was thinking of. Anyway, but more recently I have seen her hanging out with Bruce Willis, who is currently dealing with frontal tempora dementia, temporal, what do you call that? Like the front, anyway, which I think is kind of different from Alzheimer's. That Alzheimer's affects the memory, like the back of your brain, and the kind he has affects the frontal lobe, which like controls, it's different. Both suck, but I think his makes it so he can't really move much anymore. It's all very sad. But I have seen video of her and their 3 daughters with Bruce, and it all seems pretty cool. And the wife too, Bruce is remarried, and they all seem friendly. So I was kind of curious about her, and I had heard that she wrote this autobiography, and I read a little excerpt from it online, and as soon as I read that, I was like, oh, I have to read this. I want to read this whole thing. So I ran to the library and picked it up, and I think I've told you guys I haven't really been reading all that much. I don't know why. Like, I used to read a lot, and I just kind of quit reading. But I got this and read it in 2 days. I read like the first half one day and the second half this morning. So I really enjoyed it. And I was actually shocked when I looked it up on, well, I just Googled it, but Goodreads came up. And it only had like a 3.9 out of 5 stars. And some people were really like mean about it. I was shocked because I thought it was good. A lot of it, maybe part of why people don't like it, I don't know, is the first like half is really about her childhood growing up. But I found that part to be my favorite section. I thought it was interesting. And, well, for one thing, I feel lucky to have grown up in a stable family with, love. But my best girlfriend growing up, her dad had has manic depression. And her mom at that time was probably an alcoholic and doing drugs. And there was just a lot of commotion, in her life all the time. And she had a grandmother who was kind of her stable. She would hate me calling her that, her grandma. She'd always say, why do you say grandmother? I don't know. But her grandma was like a stable person in my girlfriend's life. And her Demi Moore's story reminded me so much of the kind of stuff that my friend went through. And when we were young, neither one of us like clocked it as weird what she dealt with, my friend. It just felt like life. And like her dad, who was, a grown man would go out partying with us and like invite us to parties. And it's just like now I look back and it's so weird. It's so weird, some of the stuff that happened. But her childhood really reminded me a lot of that. And I think a lot of people have similar things like that. And it was really interesting to read. One of the things I like in this book, she has the pictures. And she has pictures of her grandparents. And then Danny, who growing up, was her dad. And that's her mom. And her whole childhood. And I'm not giving away much because there's a lot in here. There's so many stories that are like really well written and interesting. But growing up, this was her mom and dad. And she had a real connection with her dad because she had a wandering eye. And her dad had that, or whatever you call that. Like, I think it's a wandering eye. Isn't that what it's called? Probably not technically. But at a certain point when I think she was like 14 years old, she found out that this isn't her dad. And that this man who her mom was married to for a year is actually her dad. And to be honest, she'd been through so much that wasn't all that shocking to her. But I think what really was shocking is that her mom had drug problems and alcohol problems and was always on the move. And so was her dad, honestly. But she felt that this was her dad. And as soon as he knew that she found out about this guy, he basically started ignoring her. And it was really sad. It was like, because she didn't know who this guy was at all. But then he kind of like, even though she was grown and he had always been her dad, he kind of cut her off. Like, the whole thing was crazy. And they were moving like every 3 months because the parents were putting false names on the bills, and it was just a very tumultuous childhood she had. And I found this part so interesting. I mean, like I said, it made me like go, wow, wow. I've noticed how really well written this was. And I looked in the acknowledgments, and her first acknowledgement is this Ariel Levy. And I looked her up, and she is I think she's still a staff writer for New Yorker magazine. And I saw a little bit of an article with her where she said, at first they were like, let's just put everything down on paper, everything. And then we can go back through and figure out what we want, what you are okay with, having out there. And I think basically she just went, let's do it. Just put it all out there. But anyway, so the story of her mother is kind of heartbreaking because I won't give away everything, but she really did her daughter dirty, like big time. And yeah, that was rough. And also Demi Moore had some major health issues where she was in the hospital for extended periods of time. And the first time, before they had proper treatments for the condition, it was like a kidney condition. She could have died. Like, it was really serious. But she kind of talks about how that was one of her, this is sad, one of the best times of her childhood was when she was little and in the hospital, because she had like a normal schedule. The nurses would come feed her and people were coming to visit. Here she is in the hospital as a little girl. And she's like, her memory was that was so safe and cozy. Oh, that makes you sad. That's sad. But anyway, and then when she was, I think, 15, she moved in with this guy, Freddie. Yeah. And he was 29, I think, at the time. Yeah, I think that's Freddie Moore, and that's where she got the name Moore. because her mom's name was King, and her dad, let's see. Anyway, so that's where she got her name, and she only was married to him for a pretty short time. And then she got her first movie, this Blame It on Rio. And then during shooting with, I think, St. Amel's Fire, that's when she met Emilio Estevez, and they dated for like 8 months or something. And then she met Bruce Willis. So it was really interesting, I thought. She talks about her relationship with Bruce. And, you know, it was a little bit of, I mean, they're both working all the time. They got married. They met, got married, and were pregnant within 4 months, which is pretty fast. And after having her first baby, she, you know, got to make another movie. And Bruce was like, wait, what? You're staying home to raise children. And she was surprised by that because she had always, they both came into it as working actors. She was really more famous. Well, he was doing Moonlighting. He hadn't yet done Die Hard. But, look, they even say right here, Bruce was on hiatus from Moonlighting. Huh. Anyway, and I got pregnant on my wedding night. She always seems to know the exact days she gets pregnant, which is kind of incredible. How do you know? But anyway, so that caused some problems in their relationship, even though she had planned it out. I think she was filming in Canada, and she planned it out that the nanny would be with the baby, and she'd have, you know, like a 4-hour shift and then off so she could breastfeed. And then, so she worked it all out, but it still made him mad. And those kind of things probably should have worked out before they got married. But then she got pregnant again, and he was all excited. But basically, they just didn't make it. But it wasn't because they didn't respect each other. And she even says in here somewhere, like, they had probably the best divorce you could have. And she said, at first I could tell Bruce was worried that I'd try to pull something with the kids or whatever, but I absolutely never wanted to do that. And so they ended up he bought a ranch across the street from her ranch in Idaho, out in the woods or whatever. And they raised the kids together. And it seemed like a pretty cool divorce. I mean, you know, as divorces go. But she talks about her mom, once she got really famous, and she had done Ghost and A Few Good Men, and I think G.I. Jane, and had the pregnancy where she posed on the cover of Vanity Fair, pregnant and unclothed, which I don't think they have a picture of it in here. They have this one, but they don't have that picture. I'm surprised. And Annie Leibovitz had taken the photo. It's really beautiful if you look it up. But at that time in society, it was crazy, to the point where I remember so clearly being at Save-On drugstore, which is where we used to ride our bikes to get candy. But I would have been older, so I must have been there home from college or something, because I have this memory of being at Save-On, which I don't know why I had been there. And they had it on the newsstand. Now, they talk in this book about how the New Yorker, or not New Yorker, Vanity Fair put it in a paper sack, like, so you could only see the top of the image. But I swear you could see the whole thing. I don't know. But anyway, and I remember being like, wow, that's pretty cool. But basically a lot of the press really, like, railed on her for it and said it was like disgusting pornography and all this stuff, because she's completely pregnant. She's like 8 months pregnant, and she's just got her hand over her, breast or whatever, and then you can't see her. She's got her hip up, but she's naked. And the press went bananas, calling her like all sorts of terrible things. I mean, some people loved it and thought it was cool, but so that was kind of interesting. I mean, she's basically a person who isn't afraid of showing her body, although she talks a lot in here about her major. Actually, I shouldn't say she was always worried about showing her body, and she was beating herself up, not eating and working out all the time, and it was just like an addiction. And she was also alcoholic. I mean, there's so many stories in here, but this one was kind of interesting. After G.I. Jane, I think it was after that, they wanted her to do this movie called Striptease. And she liked the movie Striptease because it was about a woman who loses her job, I think at the FBI or something. And then because she doesn't have any income, somehow she loses her children. And so she becomes an exotic dancer at like kind of a fancy place, I think, to make enough money to get her children back. And Demi said she kind of related to it in the fact that it's like, I'll do anything if it means having my children in a good, safe place. Like I will do anything. So she wanted to make that movie. And they offered her, because she was already signed up to do like, that says right in here, but she kind of had to negotiate because of another movie she was doing. And they ended up offering her $12 million, which was the most any woman had ever made in Hollywood. And the press started saying she'll do anything for money. She'll take off all her clothes because it was striptease. And she said at the time Bruce was also doing well. He'd been paid over $20 million for his third movie in the Die Hard series, so Die Hard 3. Notice the discrepancy. So nobody's like in Hollywood at that time, and unfortunately still, for some reason, a man is worth almost double what a woman is. But instead of people seeing my big payday as a step in the right direction for women, or calling me an inspiration, they came up with something else to call me. Gimme more. Instead of Demi Moore, gimme more. So she dealt with a lot of that kind of crap. But I know where I was going with this story. That during this time, her mom, who was having addiction issues, started selling all these stories to the National Enquirer and selling them pictures from her childhood and of her grandkids, Demi's kids. And then after the nude photo of her went out in her pregnancy, her mother, for reasons unknown, the National Enquirer, I think, paid her mother to pose nude in like the same pose. What? And she was selling that. I mean, I think her mother was pretty too. Selling that. And it was like crazy. And so she quit talking to her mom after that. And there were other things. Believe me, her mom's not innocent in this story. There's some pretty bad things. But then later her mom ends up getting cancer. And Demi was at her bedside for that and said that was really actually healing for the whole family. So yeah, it was sad. And then she meets Ashton, and I didn't even know this. They had a pregnancy, and when she was 8 months pregnant, so sad. There was no heartbeat. I didn't even know that story. And she talks about how people who've never had a miscarriage don't really understand how you've had a bond with a baby, even though it hasn't been born, and how really difficult that is. And she kind of basically said even Ashton couldn't quite understand what she went through. It's hard, I'll tell you. I had a friend who had that happen, and it's absolutely horrible. Just a horrible thing. Especially that far along. I mean, at any point. I'm not, but... Anyway. Yeah, it was tough. Oh, I kept this page because I thought this was an interesting quote. She's talking about her mom, who she's had major issues with, and how she tried everything to help her mom. She got her into rehab, and she, she did everything she could, and her mom just kept doing kind of awful things in response. And she cut her out of her life until the very end when she went back. But, there's a story in here I'm not even telling you about because it's really bad. But she says, I have since come to understand that there is no such thing as someone loving you enough to be better. People can only be as good as they are, no matter how much they love you. I feel like this is like, I have known people who had loved ones who were on alcohol or drugs and couldn't stop, and it's like, don't you love me enough to quit, or love our family enough to quit? But it's not that they don't love you enough. It's that they don't love themselves enough. People can only be as good as they are, no matter how much they love you. It's a tough thing to come to, come to that conclusion that it's not about you. And as much as it affects you, it's not about you. It's that they aren't. She doesn't even say love yourself enough. She says they can only be as good as they are, no matter how much they love you. That's tough, man. That's the bad news. The good news is that you have the power to hold their actions differently in your own mind and heart. You can choose to believe that your value is inherent, it's yours, and that the way your mother treated you says something about her, not you. I was like, wow. Anyway, I thought that was pretty good. But then she gets into this part where her daughters quit talking to her. And the event that precedes that doesn't feel like enough for it to be her daughters quit talking to her. So I do feel like there's still right at the end, right here. And it's okay if she doesn't want to tell us everything. It's okay. But it does feel a little bit to me like there's something being held back for her daughters. They quit talking to her for like 3 years. And it's around the end of her and Ashton's relationship, which went south in a big time. And she started to drink, which she had given up because she's an alcoholic. But it does almost feel like something more. And I wasn't quite sure, because like her daughters told her if she went to rehab, then they'd talk to her again. And she goes to rehab and contacts them all to come for family day, and they all refuse to come. Like, I don't know. And it seems like she's confused about it. So I do feel like there's still a little unresolved. But this was in 2019, and this was written, I think, before Bruce had his issues. She doesn't discuss that in here. But she does go quite a bit into her and Bruce's relationship, her and Ashton's relationship, and what went wrong there. She doesn't talk too much about her brother. She has a brother. I'm trying to think what else is in here. Yeah, I thought it was good. I watched a documentary that was on, I think it was on Netflix, called Brats. That was, what's his name, Andrew McCarthy, who felt like he got stuck in the brat pack, mold forever. And it was kind of interesting because I didn't love that documentary. I felt like McCarthy sounded like a big whiny baby, but he went and he talked to Demi Moore and he talked to Emilio Estevez and Rob Lowe. I think Ali Sheedy. Anyway, but it felt to me that when he talked to all the other Brat Pack members, they were like, it's not that big of a deal. That kind of like, yeah, we were, but it wasn't that big of a deal. But I felt like that's part of what got me interested in her, because when he talked to her, she seemed really the most like telling him like, look, there's always going to be things that you don't agree with how they're put out to the public. And believe me, she's had a lot of that kind of crap put out about her. And she's like, but you have to just, kind of deal with it. And I liked that about her. But the truth is, other than her very short time dating Emilio Estevez, it seemed like it was about 8 months, when she worked on St. Elmo's Fire, she was never around any of those Brat Packs. She never even once mentions any of them. I'm not sure that she really knew, like McCarthy or who are the other one, Molly Ringwald. I don't think she even mentions her. So it's funny that she is grouped into the Brat Pack, even though she didn't know any of them. And that's kind of the point of that Brat movie, is that there was no Brat Pack. It was something kind of made up by they were like, oh yeah, they're all out partying, doing cocaine, whatever. But all of them are like, we didn't even hang out. Like, maybe we were in 2 movies or something. And I think she really wasn't part of that, actually. I mean, not that she didn't party or anything, but I don't think she was part of the Brat Pack. Technically, like the press put her in there. Anyway, yeah, she talks about getting in shape for that G.I. Jane. Whew. Wow. I mean, crazy. So I would recommend this, but I love autobiographies. I love reading autobiographies. I think it's fascinating to hear into somebody's, how different. Like, you feel like somebody like her who has all the money in the world and rides in private jets, like, quit complaining, And she's not complaining. She's telling you her story, and it's not all great. And sometimes being famous kind of sucks. But she also talks about a lot of really cool things, too. So, and still when I'm reading, I'm like, oh, you're lucky. You got to go to that and that and that and that. That's so cool. And go take these awesome vacations and stuff. But it's not all, it's not all great. And look at Bruce Willis. He's got all the money in the world. It doesn't fix the problems he has. There's nothing that can fix it. And that sucks. Anyway, yeah, so if you're into, I don't know, 1980s, 90s stuff or interesting stories, I definitely recommend it. Definitely. What does this say? Sometimes I don't like these things because I think somebody else writes them and they don't really always go with the book. You know what I mean? This very first chapter. Or no, it's not there. Where is it? Oh yeah. She's talking about, she did drugs this one night, and you find out later, this was an unusual thing. And she did a thing called a whippet, which is like nitrous oxide or whatever. And she had a seizure because of that. And her friend, she says, suddenly I was back in my body, convulsing on the floor, and I heard someone scream, "Call 911." I yelled no, because I knew what would come next. The ambulance, the paparazzi, then TMZ announcing Demi Moore rushed to the hospital on drugs. And all of that happened just like I knew it would. But something else happened that I didn't expect. I decided to sit still after a life of running and face myself. But like anytime anything happens in your life when you're famous like this, like the stuff with Ashton Kutcher, she found out from the press before him. Like when he cheated, she'd find out from Google alert. It's like crazy. Anyway, yeah, I thought it was good. All right. Well, go hit up your library. I heard there's an audio version. She might read it. I don't know. But I really enjoyed reading it. I'm telling you, it was a quick read for me. I think, in 2 days. In 2 days I